look around, deja vu spidering up my spine again. We're outside the engine room again, and joy of joys, we are not in fact dead. Again. I look at Finian, and even though all this is impossible, I'm still aware of how close we're standing. A tiny part of me is conscious that the last time we did this pale, beautiful boy kissed me about 5 seconds from now. But the rest of me, this sensible part of me, is screaming at my lady parts to shut the hells up, because who cares what happened when we did this before? Ovaries? The point is, we did this before. The impossibility of all this is turning my legs to jelly, and my brain is buzzing in my skull as Finn grabs my hand and we run up the corridor to the cockpit. Again, we find Zila in the pilot's chair, the roiling darkness, the brief bursts of light, the space station. Everything is the same as when we did this before, and oh, maker's breath, we did this before. We did this before. That's a quote from Aurora's End by Amie Kaufman and Kristoff. This is YA Book Chat, and I'm your host, Leah Stuhler. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of YA Book Chat. Thank you, as always, for your continued support and for listening. I have a very special episode today for you guys. We are going to be talking about Aurora's End, which came out a couple of months ago, which is super exciting. I know, not just for me, but for many of you listening as well, as we have chatted about it. And I have two very special guests with me today to chat about this fantastic book. I have Amie Kaufman and Kristoff themselves here. You know them. They are also the authors of the Illuminae Files and the Aurora Cycle. And I'm very happy to welcome you both here today. So thank you for being here. Welcome to YA Book Chat.
Oh, thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Of course, it is my pleasure. And I do want to let everybody know too, before we get started, that today's episode is going to just be completely spoiler filled. So if you're looking for one of my normal episodes where I don't do that for the first 15 minutes, this is not going to be it, friends. Okay. I thought, no, the book's been out for a couple months now, so we're just going to do all spoilers today. So there's your warning. So I did want to talk to you guys just about kind of the Aurora Cycle series in general, and some very specific questions, of course, for Aurora's End, since that's the one that just came out recently. Could you tell us a little bit about how the idea for this series came about?
I mean, we were talking about it towards the end of Illuminae. Basically, we decided that we wanted to write another series together, and it was going to be sci-fi, but we wanted to make it a little bit of a love letter, I guess, to the properties that we had grown up with as kids. Like Illuminae was, I mean, it wasn't hard sci-fi, but it wasn't, you know, there's a blend of fantasy and science fiction in the properties that we loved, like Star Trek and Star Wars and Babylon 5 and whatever that Illuminae didn't really do. So I guess we wanted to go a little bit bigger and deal with alien races and different cultures and different technologies and make things a little bit broader in terms of scope. You know, Illuminae is basically, it's a big series, but it essentially happens in one solar system. So we wanted to throw the net a little wider and have like a galactic scale conflict, kind of more epic in scope, I guess. So that was where we started. And we just started bouncing ideas back and forth about the ideas that we wanted to cover in the books and the series that we wanted to pay homage to, and kind of went from there.
And it definitely does encompass many different sci-fi areas. I loved reading through it and just kind of picking out little things like in Burning, one of the ships, the name of this one ship is the Picard. I was like, oh yeah, that's perfect.
There's a lot of Easter eggs hidden throughout, both like real homages and homages to the properties that we love, like the Hadfield, which is the ship that Ori is found on. That's a shout out to Chris Hadfield, who's a Canadian astronaut. He spent a bunch of time up on ISS and made a bunch of amazing videos that you can still find on YouTube, just about what day-to-day life on a space station is about. So yeah, we gave a shout out to our real life heroes as well.
Oh, that's really cool. I didn't know that about the Hatfield.
Almost everything in that
Sagan station as well.
Yeah, there's, you know, I mean, probably more for the Brits, but, you know, there's a Jupiter Mining Corporation outpost, which is a shout out to Red Dwarf. There's almost everything that has a name is named for something or someone either a property we love or a person we respect or occasionally just a friend.
Very cool. I love that. I always love when I'm reading something and authors put little Easter eggs in there like that. Like it makes me excited when I read them and I catch it because it's something that I know, like a book I've read or a movie or, an astronaut or something like that. It just makes it enriches it a little bit more, I guess is what I want to say. But yeah, I love this because it was like reading, for me, it was like reading like a combination of like Star Trek and like Guardians of the Galaxy kind of, but like with teenagers instead. If teenagers went through all of these adventures, this is what it would be like.
Yeah. I mean, Starfleet Academy is kind of where we started. That was one of the thoughts that initially kicked us off. Because I mean, we're both Trek over war fans, and kind of like the sense of hope and exploration and boundless possibility that kind of original Star Trek and Next Gen kind of encompassed. So we wanted to have that same kind of vibe in this series as well. So Star Trek Academy, Starfleet Academy is where we started.
Yeah, that was one of the early descriptors to our editor was if the Breakfast Club went to Starfleet Academy.
Oh, nice. I love that. That is a very good description of it, the Breakfast Club. Because this crew of characters we've got in this series is definitely Breakfast Club material for sure.
Right. I mean, I think, you see a lot of books described as having a Breakfast Club element, but that's because we all love stories that are, about a group of people who don't seem to fit together, but ultimately do.
Yes. And this series has such a fantastic group of characters. They're all so unique and individualized, and they're just fun. They're all so fun. And I wanted to ask you about some of them. Okay. I have to give credit. Like Magellan is a character all in itself. So whose idea was Magellan? Because especially in Aurora's End, like the attitude we get from Magellan, because Magellan like narrates it kind of at the beginning and then we get more of Magellan later in the middle. And anyway, Magellan is just fun. Where did that idea come from?
It served a couple of functions, I guess. Like in the first book in particular, it was used mainly as a framing device to kind of explain, to put exposition in the book, kind of serving the same function that the Hitchhiker's Guide serves in the Douglas Adams books.
Yeah.
Like it's essentially a talking Wikipedia, and it could very quickly and succinctly explain things that readers needed to know going into the chapters that were going to come up. So rather having, Ori is she's a little bit of an audience surrogate in a sense, because she's new to this time and place and she doesn't know much about it. And instead of having a character kind of sit and explain all these things to her, Magellan was a quick and simple way to let her and thus the reader know things about the galaxy that you would need to know to enjoy the story.
Right.
But
and she has every reason asking.
Yeah, that's right. But it's also a shout out to, again, what Ames was saying, that there's a show that Americans probably aren't familiar with. It was called Red Dwarf, and we both grew up with it. It aired on the BBC. It's a British sci-fi comedy show. And there's an episode in that with a character called Talkie Toaster. It is it's a toaster that talks to you when it bakes you bread.
One of them gets
imbued.
We're right, with artificial intelligence. And it spends its entire episode, would you like toast? No. Would you like a crumpet? No. Would you like, like, shut up. And it's like, all right, I only have one more question. All right. Muffin? It's absolutely unstoppable and chirpy as. We sent a sample of Talking Toaster into our audiobook producers to be like, this is how the narrator should sound. But I think with a lot of stuff that happened at the beginning, like no idea whose idea it was, because that I think gives a false impression of how the process works, that instead it's us sitting around saying, all right, we need to provide information, how are we going to do it? And as we started to talk, we came up with this idea that it should be a shout out to Talkie Toaster and to the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and to all of the AIs.
And the idea that it would ultimately be the device by which the whole meta plot kind of gets revealed, that was completely unknown to us at the time. Like we had no idea what Magellan would become.
Yeah.
But that's just a process of the way, like it's part of the process of the way we write. We discover the story as we write them.
Yeah. I mean, I still remember we were away on a writing retreat kind of when we were working on it. And I was like, no, I got this. Because when I was a teenager, I had a long insomnia period where I would just listen to the radio play of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy every night, all night. Like I can recite that thing. I can't remember what you were working on, Jay, like something within the book that was some big sequence or something. And I was like, put your head down, sir, leave me to it. And I remember like writing all of these entries about things that we knew we would need to explain, because at the beginning it was even, like what are the different streams within the academy, and like what are Sildrathi, what are Betraskins, not that complex stuff, just writing it all down on cards and spreading it out over this giant dining table, and then starting to slide it around into order and come up with jokes for it. Writing the Magellan jokes was definitely one of the most enjoyable parts of the book for me.
Magellan does have some great lines, that's for sure. So speaking of how you work together and kind of create things, now I did watch an interview that the two of you did where you did reveal like whose kind of ideas each character was. More, you said it was more like who created each character than like necessarily wrote each one. Would you tell my listeners that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's good to frame it that way. Like to say that like that we each originated certain characters, but then as soon as you're writing, if I'm writing a chapter from one of, quote unquote, my character's points of view, all of, Jay's characters are in it, which means I have to write their lines and vice versa. So, that joke or that line or that moment you loved from a particular character could have been written by either of us, because not only do we write each other's characters in our own chapters, but we then edit each other's chapters to the point that I honestly think if you were to sit us down with the book and give us two different color highlighters and be like, highlight what you wrote, I think we would struggle for large chunks of the book
we started out, because this process was a little different from Illuminae in the sense that for most of the book, the Illuminae characters are separated from each other and they're usually talking one-on-one. So Amie and I would kind of do those conversations in real time, back and forth, sometimes just via text message, and then we would transcribe those conversations. But Aurora was different in the sense that most of the characters were thrown into the same room within a couple of chapters, and all of a sudden they're bouncing off each other. Their personalities are coming out and the modes of speech are coming out. So there wasn't enough time to kind of acclimatize to each other's characters, so to speak,
like to teach
before we
each
had
other.
to write them.
Yeah.
So we did kind of like a free writing exercise at the start. So the scene where most of the team are assembled in the briefing room at Aurora Academy, Amie and I just basically freeform kind of role played those conversations just to give each other an idea of how each character kind of spoke and acted and what their most obvious personality traits were. And we also did a series of kind of character biopics, I guess, that kind of broke down physical appearance and political belief and deep dark secret and the thing that makes you mad and the thing that makes you smile, and kind of did like this crash course in each other's characters. And then we just kind of jumped into it. So the lines are very, very blurry, like Amie said. So the origins of characters lie with each of us, but very quickly the crew kind of became our crew, which is one of the cool things about the whole process.
And not something I think that we could have pulled off in our first series. I think we had to, our writing is we're so familiar with each other's writing now, and like the way we do it is so entwined that it was actually not even hard for this series, but I think would have been impossible at the start of Illuminae.
I still remember there was a moment when we were editing Obsidio, and Ames sent me back a chapter with notes on it, and she was like, "What did you mean when you said this?" And I said, "I don't know, you wrote it." That's your line. So the lines get very blurry.
Very blurred. Yeah.
I love
especially
that.
I think for me, because I just never remember who wrote what. But I mean, we can say that like the originators, as in I guess like the people who kind of set the tone for each character was I set the tone originally for Ori and Zila and Finn and Magellan, and Jay set the tone for Tyler and Scar and Kat and Cal. I nearly forgot one of our children there for a moment. But yeah, then shortly thereafter, everyone was everyone's.
Yeah. Which makes sense. Like you said, with the way that it's written, your characters are all right there in each chapter. They're all together. So much of it that you really don't have a choice in the matter. You have to get to know each other's characters. It's kind of as you were talking about getting to know the characters and the different things that, you did to kind of set out who they were and what they believed in and how they would talk and all that. It kind of makes me think of, like, as an actor, I told Amie this earlier, Jay, I'm a theater teacher, former actor. And,
Sure.
that's what we have to do too, in order to create a character. You have to really sit down with the play and open it up and say, okay, who is this person? And really dive in and figure out all the little intricacies and the ins and outs. And a lot of who they are is tied to the other characters too in the play. So,
yeah. And I think, I certainly think sorry, go on, Jay.
I was just going to say, like, the characters change in the course of bouncing off each other. Like they all influence each other in different ways. So it's a constant evolution as well. Like, characters aren't set in stone. You want them to grow and change over the course of the narrative. And a lot of the forces that exert that growth are the characters that you surround them with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because we come up with some each, but we don't want to accidentally have overlap. So then as soon as they start meeting, you start being like, oh, okay, this one will shift slightly towards more sarcastic or slightly towards more assertive, so that they can kind of shuffle around and all fit together and, make a little, like, click into place.
Speaking of the characters too and their personalities, this makes me think of, how they each have these great personalities. Some of them have specific phrases and things that they say. I want you to know, I have incorporated into my everyday vernacular the phrase "mother custard." Like every day, at some point it comes out.
There's like a lot more patisserie-based swearing out there than we anticipated now when we started this. Yeah.
It's the one that stuck with me the most. And something happen. I'll drop something, I'll bang it, bump into something. I teach in the theater at school. And so I have to walk up and down the aisles to pick up all the pencils and trash the kids leave behind on the floor. Right. And inevitably I always bump into an armrest. And every time I do, the first thing I yell is "Mother Custard."
It's very satisfying to say, isn't it?
It is. It really is.
I love it.
Yeah. Very satisfying.
First time my 11-year-old heard me say it, he looked at me and was like, "What did you say?" I said, yeah, I said that. And he was like, "That's weird, Mom." I said, "No, it's from a book. It's fine."
Right. It's still weird. It's just also literary.
Yeah. So it's great.
Yeah.
Also a description of us.
Hey, I love it. So another thing I wanted to ask you about the characters, and this was a friend of mine, her and I, she loves this series as well. And something that she had pointed out too, is that the characters are very diverse in a lot of different ways. Like Ziva is in the LGBTQ community, and she's also like neuroatypical. Finn is kind of like differently abled in a way. Ty and Scarler are mixed race. Was that something that you set out to do, to have them be diverse like that? Or did that just kind of happen organically?
I mean,
it was a bit of both.
Right. Like, I think it would be weird if we had just created a kind of all white, all straight, able-bodied community. Like, that wouldn't be a reflection of the world we live in or even of us. But so I think, you automatically, when you set out to reflect the world, you end up with diversity, but you can't then just casually go about it, because some of those aspects of those characters aren't things that we experience, which means, you have to get it right. You've got to do your homework. You've got to, which we did. We worked with sensitivity and authenticity readers. We researched, spoke to, even down to stuff like, since we can be spoilery, Zila tells us all about the trauma that she went through as a child, you know, when her family were killed. And so right as we were beginning the series, I sat down with a psychiatrist who specializes in trauma, particularly in children. And we worked through the backstory that I had in mind for her, because what I wanted to be sure of was that it was like reasonable and feasible that over the course of the adventure, as she finds, you know, her chosen family more and more in the squad, that, you know, she starts to shift, and the way she, you know, responds to them emotionally starts to shift. And it was very important not to give her, you know, like a miracle cure from her trauma. It was very important to be like, oh, but now she found love and she's fine. So I talked a lot to him about what would her childhood need to have been like in order for her to be able to return to this point again, so that we could, you know, make sure. And I'm sure for a lot of readers who, you know, you sure hope have not experienced that level of trauma, perhaps that type of research doesn't necessarily show up, which is fine, because for some it does. And, you know, no matter what the part of it is that you're writing about, whether it's a part of that you also share or that you don't, you know, it's so important to get it right. But you do your homework.
And it's also, it's a legacy, again, of the sci-fi that we kind of grew up with. Like,
totally.
If you look at the bridge crew of the original USS Enterprise, you've got African-American actor, you've got a Japanese-American actor, you've got a guy who's playing a Russian. Like, this is in the middle of the Cold War.
Right, like that was as controversial.
Not so long after World War II. Nichelle Nichols was like the first African-American actress in a role that significant. I don't know if that's apocryphal, but I have heard that she was considering quitting, and Dr. Martin Luther King told her that she shouldn't, because seeing someone like her on television was so incredibly important. So that's a legacy from that utopian view of Roddenberry style future that really inspired the book. So we wanted to make our galaxy the same.
And I think for doing sci-fi, I mean, you really kind of need to, you know, like at least for me, I mean, when you think of sci-fi, like that's how it is. You expect to see starships with different aliens, different people from different planets and races and skin colors. And so it's fantastic to see it. And I absolutely love it. It's perfect. I think it would have not worked if it wasn't like that.
No. But I mean, I think, you know, when you say, is it sort of incidental or deliberate? The answer is both.
Yeah.
You know,
that makes sense. Do you feel like either one of you are more like one of the characters than another? Like, are you like Amie? Are you like Ori or Ziva or anybody? What do you think?
Oh, I'm nowhere near as clever as Zila is. That is one of the issues with when you're like, I'm going to write a really smart character now. And then you're like, no, what's a smart thing to do?
Now I have to be smart.
Now I have to be charismatic. Oh, what was I thinking?
Zila was like Data for me, you know, from Next Generation. Every time I read her, I was like, Data. This is what I thought that she was.
I mean, I think, I don't know. I share bits of a lot of them, you know. I share bits of Finn's smartassery and his deep family connections. I share, you know, some of what Ori talks about, you know, with her family comes from the fact that by training, I'm a migration historian. Like my interest, my historical kind of area is groups of people who carry their traditions with them when they migrate. Because again, there's a whole podcast episode about this. I could talk for hours, but you know, like the really short version is that there are particular groups, in particular in the centuries I was studying, Irish and Jewish migrants were the two groups who carry their identity with them for many, many more generations than any other group. And so, you know, and I'm descended on one side Irish and on the other side Jewish. So, you know, that was of interest to me. But, you know, I gave Ori and her family, you know, some of the traditions carrying through her family, because that's, you know, that's one of my areas that I'm fascinated by, the ways we carry ancestors with us, even when they're from places that we might not have been.
We'll be back after a quick break. Are you passionate about writing or just love the arts? Tune in to the Poetry Podcast with A.
discover the latest trends in the industry, enjoy insightful book reviews, participate in Q&As, listen to captivating poetry readings, and get inspired by author interviews. We release episodes on the first 3 Thursdays of each month. Don't miss out. Come check us out at the Poetry Podcast with A.
I love that. I feel like that too. My family is Italian, both my mother and my father's side. Like I am just, that is it. I'm Italian, Italian American. And it's, very like, I can see, growing up with my grandparents and my mom and my aunts and uncles, that tradition, like everything Italian is just very much in us. And we carried everything with us, like down to, my grandparents have since passed on, but my cousins and I still carry on as many of the traditions as we can. So.
Right. Yeah. It's different groups. Yeah. Different groups carry all kinds of things. Jay, your similarity is Cal, right? The two of you both like to sit around and recite poetry and strum a stringed instrument and gaze into the distance. Yeah.
I think there's elements of each of us in all the characters in one way or another. And it might even be a facet of your personality that you wish you had. And the character is kind of an exploration of that. There's a piece of in every character there's a piece of its author. What kind of piece that is can be, it can be to greater or lesser degrees, but yeah, there's a fragment of each of us. And I think there's probably a fragment in each of us in the characters that our co-author created as well. Because like I say, the characters are kind of bouncing off each other constantly. And the people that influence you the most in your life are your close friends and your family, and the squad start as one and kind of become the next. So the pieces of each other kind of bleed into each other and make them someone new. So
I think we kind of meet in the middle. Like, if I hold out Finn and go, here, he's kind of a smart ass, and Jay's like, oh, okay, let me get that bit of me that's also kind of a smart ass and pull that up, pull that up to the surface when I write his lines and when I write him. He becomes a mix of the ways in which we both are,
Yeah.
We wrote this last book during lockdown when, Jay's on the other side of the country from his family and wasn't able to see them at all. And so, I assume that when that's happening and you're writing about a character with deep familial connections, presumably those two things merge at some point, whether you're thinking about it or not,
So speaking of the last book, Aurora's End, I heard that you had originally planned a different ending for it, but then you ended up changing it. Is that correct?
So you're very well informed.
That's what a friend of mine told me. I was like, okay. So how do you feel about how the ending is now? Like after now that the book has been out for a little while and you've had reactions to it with the way that it ends, are you like, okay, this is good, we totally ended it the right way? Or is there any spark of like, I kind of wish we had gone back and done the other ending?
No, definitely not. The way we ended it was the right way. And it wasn't until quite late in the day that we realized that, like, it was almost a foregone conclusion. It was like an unspoken thing that this book was going to end in a big pew kind of Star Wars-esque space battle. And it wasn't until we kind of got to the 11th hour that started to just feel wrong. Because, like I said before, we're not prescient enough to know how the whole series is going to end when we start writing it. And the story often changes in the telling of it. So we didn't really know the kind of full depth and breadth of the story that we were writing until we were in the middle of it. And when we were reaching the end of it, we realized that the story we had written didn't fit that ending that we imagined anymore. And it wasn't until Ames started writing it. Like Ames sent it to me. We kind of spitballed on the phone for like half an hour, and Ames said, okay, shut up. Leave me alone for like 2 weeks. I'll bring it back to you. And as soon as I read it, I realized that it was absolutely right. It felt perfect.
It was funny though.
It felt like it encompassed everything that we were trying to say and do.
Right. But like, I might have put those words down, but like, it was a group effort because I had been sitting there just with like a growing uneasiness, being like, it's the wrong ending that we're heading towards, but I don't know what is. And then one day Jay rings me up and goes, just been thinking, as we sit here writing, you know, like the two of us don't kind of sit around and talk about like, what are our themes very often? Like
No.
Well, I think we just kind of both know, like we both, without having to talk about it, we understand what story we're writing. But he's like, as we sit here writing this story that's kind of ultimately about like found family and choosing love and choosing ways to come together and, you know, instead of destroying each other, finding, you know, what we have in common. It's getting harder and harder to imagine how we like just shoot the shit out of each other, you know,
just
as a natural conclusion to that journey.
And it's all better.
Right. And I was just like, oh, that's what's been bothering me, like clear as day. And then I was like, oh, so it ends with love and choice. Yeah, and Jay's like, yeah, in the background being like, so I'm just thinking, and at that point I did tell him to shut up, which is not something I've ever done in our writing relationship before or things. Like, you know, when
I gotta leave you alone.
Yeah, stop talking. And I ran off. And
you convinced me. Take yes for an answer and like leave me alone.
Right. And like, and ran off.
Yeah. As soon as Amy sent me the chapter, I was like, oh yeah, okay, this is exactly right. So yeah, right. not at all. It would have felt deeply wrong had we entered it the way we originally planned to. It was also logistically going to be really, really hard because we made this rod for our back with like, we spread it out over 22 different planets. So we were going to have like 22 different battles.
Right.
But it was just going to be way too hard anyway. So it was a good thing that we were wrong because we were driving the wrong way up the freeway towards a dead end.
Yeah, that would have been crazy.
Well, I mean, also there had been a lot of fighting already in this book. There had been a lot of physical combat, and it was like people are just going to be tired by the time. Which and the thing is, I think, you know, you do a lot on instinct storytelling that you don't necessarily realize till later. And in retrospect, I think it's really clear that the reason we had already put in all that fighting was because we understood it couldn't be the final note. It had to be the final obstacle instead. And, you know, and then the final note would be the ending. But we didn't know that at the time. I think we were just instinctively shaping it the right way. And thank goodness we worked out what we were doing.
Yeah. So yeah, no, it feels absolutely the right choice.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
I mean,
you know what? I mean, I think we could have made that giant battle satisfying. I think we write a good enough battle that people would have been like, yeah. But then I think it's the real measure of a book is kind of like when you walk away and think about it. And I think when they walked away and thought about it, they would not have found it satisfying in the way that they found this ending.
I agree. I mean, as the reader, like this ending was so satisfying for me. Like I absolutely loved it. Now I am going to tell you, I did cry like the last 3/4 of the way through this book. I'm not gonna lie. I probably started like chapter 26-ish and then all the way to the end. Funny story. So I finished reading it in a car ride. So my husband and I were driving with our children to see family, and it's a 13-hour drive. So we tend to split it up in 2 days. So, you know, it's like a 7-hour drive one day. Okay. So, and I read all the time. This is what I do. I finish multiple books on these trips when we take them. And I'm sitting there reading through the ending of Aurora's End, and I am like sobbing, like I am so in tears. And my husband is driving, you know, and I'm like, it was so bad. I'm trying not to like, you know, massively like convulse, and like I had to like put the book up over my face and like turn away towards the window because I'm like, he's gonna be like, what the hell is the matter with you right now? And I'm like, it's just really good. Like,
oh man, this is amazing.
That's amazing. I love it.
Oh my goodness.
That's a weird thing to take a compliment from. Like, we make people sob openly on car rides. But yeah, I mean that's the highest form of flattery you can get, really.
It's definitely a compliment.
You know, like I saw this, it was an Instagram post by Victoria Schwab the other day, and I'm going to misphrase her slightly, I'm sure, but she was talking about like basically the experience of like writing in a pandemic. And one of the things she said was something like, writing is a long and lonely journey with the promise of company at the end. And one of the tough things about pandemic releases is the author doesn't get the company at the end. You know, we tell the story and we send it out, but we don't get those moments where we're like, well, and you're not saying how did it go so people can be like, oh, great, you're a genius. You're saying it because you're like, I made a thing and I want to share it with you in the hope it will affect you. Did it? You know, and then because it affected me, and, you know, you can share something with the reader. So like, you know, we're cackling here at the idea of, you know, hiding behind a book from your husband, but also like as we're doing that, also it's incredibly meaningful to hear because we have missed so much of it with this series. So, you know, it means a lot to hear that stuff.
Good. And I can
really
tell you,
thank you. It's a wonderful thing to say.
I can tell you, I'm not the only one. Like I, you know, have friends who I've read this series too, and we were reading at the same time, and they said the same thing. They were like, yeah, I just kept crying. I mean, all of these things, right? So Zila finding love, Zila we realized that she's the one who sets everything. Can I just tell you, as I was reading like book 1 and book 2, really, okay, Burning, like the biggest question that I had in my mind was, how on earth did all of these things get set up for them when they weren't even born? And like all this, that was like the biggest question that I had. And so, but I feel like finding out that Zila stays behind and she's the one who does it, I was just like, oh my gosh, like I started crying at that part. I was like, it's Zila, of course it is. And you know, I'm
right.
And
but
then,
it's not all sacrifice. It's her happy ending.
It is. It's both, which also happy tears too. So this is why there was so much crying at the end of this. And then future Tyler, oh my goodness, that's like the saddest death scene that I have ever read. I mean, and I mean that as a compliment. Like it's good. But you know,
no,
I was like,
I agree.
Oh
no, Jay
gosh.
wrote that, and at the end, I was just like, "Oh, you didn't want me to critique this, did you? Oh, shit! I'll read it again. Sorry."
But it's all good. It didn't happen. Like they avoided that future. It's all good.
We wiped it out. Yeah.
And the funny thing was I thought like I get, you know, like the last chapter, I'm on the very last chapter and I think I'm good, right? I think like I've cried all the tears. And then they're listening to the message in the meeting. And we find out that the person who delivered the message is Ori's like great niece. And I was like, oh crap. Started crying again. Like it's just,
we were trying to figure out a way to use Ori's family like through the whole trilogy. Like we kept kind of bouncing this idea around like, can they, you know, can there be some secret society, or can they do something? Can they have some role? And it just didn't fit. Like there was just too much. Yeah, there was just too much else happening. But logically, it made perfect sense that Zila would talk to them, would let them know that she's okay. So yeah, that felt like a really cool end note with this question that we had been asking for like 3 books in the trilogy, and it just kind of slotted perfectly into the place of that last chapter. So yeah, that was cool.
Well, and like
makes you feel cleverer than you are.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. But it felt right because the Zila we met at the start of this series would never have taken a risk like that because it was an unnecessary risk. You know, she didn't have to tell them. She and her plan did not gain anything from her telling them. She told them because it was to give a gift to their family. And, you know, it was only by the end of the series that she had come to the place where she valued that gift highly enough that she would do it.
Yes. And it was so beautiful. Now, I am curious. I like to ask this question. Like when I've read a book that makes me cry, especially a book that makes me ugly cry, like this was ugly cry. It always makes me curious. Did either of you cry or get emotional at all while you were writing some of these parts?
I got a bit misty when I read the end that Amie wrote.
Yeah.
Like I don't cry as a general rule, but I definitely got misty-eyed reading the end, and that's how I knew it was right. Like it just felt perfect. And I don't think I had a single note.
No, we didn't change
when
anything.
I sent back that chapter, didn't change a thing. It was just like, oh yeah, no, this totally hits. Like every beat hits perfectly. So
this kind of praise is very hard to get out of Mr. Kristoff. So I was very pleased.
I'm terrible in that respect. But yeah, I think that was the closest I came, was like reading that end sequence. Like there are obviously really emotional scenes in the book, like future Tyler dying and the conversation that Cal and his dad have. There's a line in there that hits pretty close to home. So yeah, there's certainly a lot of emotion in the book. But yeah, Ames got me like this close.
I'll take it. I mean, I think often when I'm writing really emotional stuff, I am feeling it, but I'm also a little bit stepping outside myself and watching the scene, because I sort of need to be thinking like, oh, okay, like, you know, if so-and-so is dying right now, what are the details that will most affect the reader? What's like the visceral or sensory detail that I can describe from the scene? So you're sort of like both in it and outside it. I mean, I do remember after writing the finale, I just like couldn't do anything for about 2 days. I think I was just really emotionally, and that also came, I think, just from finishing the book.
Yeah,
I'm always just a bit of a ragdoll afterwards. But I find the moment in the epilogue when Ori realizes who's brought the message very affecting.
Oh my, I'm telling you, it was like, I could not contain myself at that point. That was like the straw that broke the camel's back. Like I'm telling you, I just like settled down. And then I read that one part and was like, oh my gosh, just sobbed.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I think right now as well, because we've all been apart from people for so long, you know, seeing a reunion, I think it hits different. But no, for me, the stuff I sobbed over was the stuff I didn't write, which was like, you know, losing Tyler and Leigh and that sort of thing. And just like I want readers to know, you know, like I yell at Jay for them when stuff like that happens. like all my little comment bubbles are just all caps, you know, outrage and sadness. So, you know, he knows what he's doing.
Anyway. I think like writing Kat's last chapter in Rising was really quite hard.
Yeah.
Like
oh my God, I sobbed over that. Reading it
when she gets taken by the mom.
That
was hard too. That's still like, of all the chapters I've written, that's one of the ones I'm most proud of. So that felt that cut pretty close to the bone as well.
You're right. That feels like a lifetime ago, but I definitely cried when you sent me that one.
Yeah, wow, it is a long time ago.
Yeah. And like the thing is, like, you should cry. You should have those feelings. Like writing is, you know, about emotional honesty. So, and I think that's one of the things that maybe we all don't talk about as much, that like you can't portray deep feelings like that unless you know, have felt deep feelings like that. And so, you know, then when you offer them up to a reader, it's actually you and your deep feelings that are being judged. So, you know, not just your portrayal of them. It feels very much like it's you sometimes.
Now, I'm not, you know, a book author like you guys are, but I do write for a blog and I'm edit for it. And I've, you know, submitted pieces, and I wrote, there was a blog that I've written for in the past, and they were going to do a book and they're looking for submissions. And I did send them something. And this piece that I wrote was very emotional for me and very personal, and which is the type of thing that they like. And so when they then told me no, it was rough. Ooh. Like, it was like, I was like, you were rejecting me and my personal story, like personally, you know, it's hard. Sure. It's hard not to take that personally, which I know that you guys know more about than me, but so yeah.
I mean, I don't. I think we've all been there. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I did actually, on my own podcast, I did an episode called Writing with Vulnerability. That's all about sharing stuff like this and the good that it can do, and how much it can let people know they're not alone when you share stuff. But it's hard work.
For sure. Well, now that we've gone down that trail of emotions, let's maybe go to a different direction. Okay. So Aurora's End. All right. This book takes place in 3 different places in time. Like, we've got the present and the past and the future. And I just, first of all, I do have to say this. Kudos to both of you for the opening, like however many chapters it was, where we're in the time loop, like every chapter for like 6 chapters. And the thing is, though, is it was great because it wasn't the same every time. Like, they were trapped in the same time loop. for all of those chapters, but you found a great way to make it different and interesting and like add these little tidbits and things into each one. So kudos to both of you for making like those first chapters.
You know what?
Awesome. Like
listeners can't see, but I'm like here nodding at you. And the reason I'm nodding at you is because Jay did that. Because I think originally, I don't even remember what POV it was in, maybe Zila's, but like I was trying to write the opening and it just wasn't working. I wasn't managing to convey the time loop idea quickly enough. And Jay was like, hand it over for a minute. And it came back with what we, at least in our manuscript, called like chapter 2A, 2B, 2C, 2D, which is like as it looped and relooped. And I was like, oh, that's what I was reaching for. The best thing about co-authoring is when you're like, I cannot solve a problem. And the other person's like, really? It's easy.
I think the first chapter Zilla's and the rest is Scar. From memory.
Yeah, and then Scar does our loops, which is what so I sent it to you being like, here you go, but like what next? How do we reboot? And yeah, you were like, I got this. Don't worry about it.
I mean, that was definitely the hardest part of the book to write, that the sequence in the past, the loop. And unfortunately we started when we plotted this book, we broke the 3 groups and timelines into blocks, and we just wrote one, and then we wrote the next, and then we wrote the last. And we started with the first, which was the time loop, which was by far technically the most difficult part of the book.
Far.
Probably technically the most difficult thing that we've ever written together.
Yeah.
And it was really tough. We spent like a weekend away on retreat just trying to get the logistics of it into place. And it was like wading through molasses. It was really, really tough. And then kind of executing the way we had it imagined, putting that down on the page was an extra level of difficulty. I don't think we could have written that sequence like 3-4 years ago. But really happy with the way it turned out in the end. It took a lot of rewriting. Like that sequence probably got rewritten more times than certainly anything in that book, and probably more times than anything we've ever written before.
Yeah,
we don't rewrite a lot. Avoid writing time travel if you can. Authors out there, it's really tough.
And like, what's really fascinating to me is that we made that choice, because I remember that, like, I have vivid memories of the two of us sitting in this pub together, because with the Illuminae files, every document in that series has a timestamp on it. And although most readers will never look, every timestamp in that book is accurate. So like, we know, if there's a document in the Illuminae that says you're on the bridge of the ship, and then there's one that says that you're at the cargo bay doors, if it says that those are 6 minutes apart, that's because we know it takes 6 minutes. And every time someone makes that journey in that book, it will take 6 minutes, unless they're wounded, in which case it will take 8, or, like we got all of that timing down to an absolute science. And we were sitting there with this massive spreadsheet and had typed out literally every document and event in the book and every moment at which it happened. And we looked at each other at that moment and we were like, let's learn from this, never again. And so like, forward a few years, I guess it's like childbirth, like you got to forget or you can't go back, because we jump forward a few years. Well, and we were like, I think we just didn't quite realize at first, but then we were like, oh, so if it's a time loop, that means that at least at the start, because of course it's a time loop that gets shorter and shorter each time, but like all of the announcements have to be the same on the comms, and they all like, if it happens at 18 minutes in one, it's got to happen at 18 minutes in the other. And like, I remember sitting there with this bloody spreadsheet being like, all right, we know that it takes X minutes in order for them to get, they appear at the start of the loop, and then they've got to get into Nari's ship, and then they've got to get down to the station, and then they've got to get, inside the station. And we had like down to the second what the timing was on all of those. And, then we know that the guard walks by 90 seconds later, and so then they can jump. And so that means that announcement has to be inserted exactly here, because that's the 16-minute mark or whatever. And this giant table of all of this stuff. And every time it hit a point where when I was locking this table, I was like, Jay, I just like, meet my eyes right now. Do not make any more changes, because if you do, and it needs to take them 1 minute less to make that walk, that affects every loop, and I will come to your house and I will hurt you. Like, it was you know, and so when we said
it should be noted that Amie is also terrible at math. The only person in the world that is worse at math than Amie is me.
Right.
Like, we are both really bad at math.
So bad.
The level of difficulty to get this spreadsheet in line is significant.
I can't even imagine. I mean, I'm just reading it. I was like, this is dizzying. Like, how did they write this? Because I also am horrible at math. Like, I tell my students all the time, there's a reason I teach drama and not math.
Right.
Just reading through that and thinking about the timing and, and then it's diminishing. And I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know how they did this.
No, the only scenario in this universe in which I am the mathematics expert is one in which the only other person present is Jay. Like, I'm very bad at this stuff.
You're in very dire straits.
Yeah, when you're coming to me for help, you really are. And when we sent in the book, we actually sent in this spreadsheet because we knew that the copy editors would be checking everything, and we were like, I think partly we wanted to show our editor, like, be mindful of what you suggest we move, because this is the domino effect that you're going to set off. But also for the copy editors, we were like, here, we suffered for like 2 days straight. Maybe this will shorten your suffering a little bit. And then they found mistakes in our spreadsheet, and I just crawled under the table and wouldn't come out for a while. But we got there. It was fine. It's done now.
We got there.
Yeah. I do want to say, in reference to the time loop, from myself and your other readers, this is twofold. Number one, thank you for putting Finn and Scar together. Yes. Awesome. Perfect. And number two, during the time loop, like, I loved how we just had those little moments with Finn and Scar where they'd like stop and like make out somewhere in a closet or something. Oh, we got some time left before the next.
I got time.
We explode.
I mean, at that point, they're under the impression that they can just do this forever until they get it right. Like, that was one of the things that we discovered in the writing of it as well. Because logically speaking, if you're just resetting every day, you could just live every day until you live the perfect one. So we had to introduce the shortening loop. That kind of only came later in the writing process in order to inflict like a time pressure on them. Otherwise, they would just mess about until they I decided to actually try this run, guys. Like, I've
should we
tried every
take this
food in the
loop off?
cafeteria. I've read every book in the world. We may as well get out of here now. Like, so that came to us later. But it was important to kind of take the time for those relationship beats as well.
Because we have the two of them, and then that's when Zila and Nari develop their relationship as well, which is really important. So I think it's so sweet. Oh my gosh, I loved it. So, all right. So I'm guessing, so that was like the hardest part. Then was it a little bit easier, at least, to write like the other two sections, this being in the present and this in the future? Or was that still kind of like confusing in your brains to have the 3 different time periods?
I mean, nothing was as bad as that spreadsheet. I don't think anything will be again.
No. I mean, they
had their own challenges.
Different structures. And, they had their own. But nothing kind of compared to the first. I guess the next biggest challenge we faced was the decision whether, because originally we wrote them in 3 different parts, and we were planning on having them in 3 different parts in the book. So you would just have all time loop, and then all future Ori Cal stuff, and then all Tyler. And it wasn't until quite late in the process that we decided we were going to weave them all together. So you would kind of be bouncing forth across 3 different timelines and 3 different groups of people. We wondered whether that was just going to be too complex. But I think that was maybe because we are mired in the complexity of part 1. And we were just kind of mentally scarred by having to put that damn spreadsheet together. So in the end, we kind of tried it, and it worked. But that process as well was a difficult one. Like we basically had to do it and figure out where all the breaks were going to be and how each part would thread in with each other and where the act blocks were going to stop. And it wasn't until we kind of put it together and read it through we realized that was probably the best way to do it. And in hindsight, it definitely was. It would have been quite weird in hindsight if they had been blocks unto themselves. But we didn't know if it would work until we tried it.
It definitely works really well the way that you had it. I loved it. I think it had a really great flow to it, and it made sense, where all of the breaks were. And All right. So the future here, my one thing, I'm reading this and Cal, when he meets Lay and he's with Tyler and he just can't figure it out. I'm like, oh, come on, you dummy. Like there has to be like, it was just funny because it's like
if you met, someone super familiar, your first thought wouldn't be.
No, it wouldn't at all.
He doesn't.
It's just funny.
He's in the story.
No, he doesn't. And it's funny to read it, as a reader and be like, because we know it's hard sometimes when but you have to then put yourself in the character's head and be like, okay, he doesn't know. It's okay. And then when he does figure it out,
he'll get there eventually.
Yeah.
Right. But like, if you're in a story, then you can see the narrative arc and you can be like, oh, this must be X. But like, he doesn't know he's in a story.
Right. So besides Finn and Scar, I do want to say one of the other probably the most satisfying relationship that came out of this whole thing for me was Tyler and Sadie. The whole of Burning, like my favorite scenes were the two of them together trapped in the prison and the way they would talk to each other. And the whole time I'm thinking, oh gosh, please, I need them to like come together. I need this to like crash hard into each other and for this to happen. And so it was beautiful to then see in Aurora's end that the two of them do come together and then and that works out like that. I loved that.
I'm glad you like it. It's probably it's one of the most fun relationships to write, really. Like two people who just hate each other and for very sincere and logical reasons. Like they're not just I don't like you for no particular reason. It's each of them has very solid foundation for their personal dislike. But they're the coolest relationships to write, ones that are built on conflict, but there's a broader conflict around them that kind of slowly forces them together. They were a lot of fun to write together. They're not really together in the book for very long. It's only kind of the first act of the book, and then they just get separated by circumstance. But the moment where she kind of comes back at the end is one of my faves. It's like it's like the Rohirrim arriving at Pelennor Fields, like when all hope is lost, and then someone shows up you don't expect. That was a cool kind of broad narrative beat as well as a really cool personal beat. And that's one of it seems to be one of the favorite lines of people in the book. That I will see you in the stars line. I've seen people getting that tattooed on themselves recently, which is cool. There was a lot of cool components that kind of came together in that love story. So it was fun.
It's perfect.
Sadie's fun to write.
I mean, even though I could see why, because even though they're not together very long in end, it's just the satisfaction of knowing that that's what happened is enough, as the reader. Because in Burning, in book 2, I mean, they're both half dressed, they're both half naked, which makes it even more hilarious and perfect because I mean, you're not gonna be able to resist them for very long. And when you can read each other's minds, I mean, it's inevitable.
I think you can correct me if I'm wrong, Jay, but I think right back when we did the initial character creation, like you had Scar and Ty being half Sildrathi from then, didn't you? Like that was in their very first iteration.
Okay.
So it was always
their dad was behind enemy lines. I mean that kind of explained how Scar was so good with people all the time. Like she was basically picking up on low level telepathy. Like I know what you're thinking, so I will tell you what you want to hear. So she was kind of more in tune with that side of herself than maybe Ty was. Yeah,
and if you go back through knowing what you now know about them, and you see Ori as she starts to kind of sense other people's minds. There are little hints in the way she senses Scar and Ty's minds throughout the books, the ways that their minds are different from Zila or Finn or anyone else. And it's the Sildrathi in them that she's sensing. She just doesn't know that.
There's like a colorscape almost. And she sees it in Cal as well. Yeah. Because his mother was a Waywalker, so he has kind of latent telepathic abilities in his blood too. But there's really subtle hints that Amy's put in that Ty and Scar are just a little bit different to everybody else.
Yeah.
but
See,
you
some
realise
things
what
we
that is.
knew from the beginning, just not everything.
Yeah.
Hey, I mean, it makes it more interesting, right? When you're writing it, makes it more of an adventure if you don't know what's going to happen right away.
Oh
You
yeah,
have to figure it out.
that's the most fun that you have
Yeah.
writing, when your characters do something that even you don't expect, or you come across a twist that you hadn't anticipated. That's
Yeah.
one of the joys of discovery and kind of finding the story as you tell it. And you know that if your characters start doing things you don't expect, they're kind of fully realized. If they have their own personality and their own force of will that it exerts on the story, and maybe do things that you don't want them to do, or makes your job harder, but it feels right, then that's a sign that you've made kind of a fully fleshed out real character. So it's a good thing, and it's an exciting thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to ask you both kind of a really fun question to wrap this up. Now, I am a huge fan of The Princess Bride, like maybe slightly obsessed with it. I mean, I can watch the movie, put it on mute, and pretty much say every single stinking line because I've seen it that many times. So, so when I read Aurora Rising, the minute I found that first Princess Bride reference, I was like, oh, stop it. This is fantastic. And I actually messaged you, Jay, and was like, please tell me that, like, on Instagram. And I was like, please tell me that this was a Princess Bride reference. And you did respond and say, yes, it was. And I was like, oh, that's the best thing ever. And then I did find the one in Burning as well. But I do have to admit, okay, I did not see one. What, did I miss one in Aurora's End? Like, I thought I remembered reading a line that referenced true love, but did you put one in there?
I mean, the thing is, I don't think that like Jay said at the beginning, this book was very much like a love letter to everything that we love. But there was certainly not a checklist. Like I think, you know, I mean, I know with a lot of it, like sometimes we do it and we'd be like, is that too much? And I'll be like, no, the hell with it. You know, most people won't recognize chumps. I don't think they exist. Ooh. And, you know, the people who do will. But yeah, there wasn't like now, do we have a reference to this for this book and that for that book? I think it was just whatever came to mind as feeling like the right reference at the moment was what went in.
Yeah,
so.
Whatever felt right at the time. And we often do it just to amuse each other, because we both kind of like the same stuff and grew up watching the same stuff. We'll just throw in a riff here or there, almost to make the other laugh. It's like just to entertain ourselves.
Yeah, very much.
Yeah,
so.
most of the time they just feel right, so they make the cut. So I don't know if we did put one in book 3.
Okay.
It wouldn't surprise me if we did, because often we forget that we do it. Like, we just do it for fun and then roll on.
Yeah.
So if there is one, it wouldn't surprise me, but I can't recall what it is off the top.
Right, because you don't do it consciously. You just pluck it off the shelf at the right moment. And you know, everyone's got like things that they quote that no one else knows that they're quoting. You know, like for me, like there's a West Wing line like, oh, you just did a whole thing there all by yourself, that I quote all the time and people mostly don't recognize. And for me, I don't think they exist is a thing I say all the time about things that I don't want to exist.
Yeah.
And most people just think I'm saying something.
Line?
Sorry?
Is that a CJ line? Is that a line from CJ?
No, that is, I think it's Sam and Josh. We're not actually 100% sure. Is it Toby?
All right.
I'll be off to the internet after this to figure it out. It's been in my DNA for so long now that I don't even know where it came from. Yeah. But yeah, I don't think they exist is a thing I often say about something that I don't want to exist. And people are often looking at me like, but it definitely does. And I'm like, it's
a reference. It's a reference.
I think in the original character Bible that we did when we were putting together kind of scrapbooks of visuals and whatever, one of the visuals we had for young Tyler was Carrie Ellis from Princess Bride.
Yep.
Yeah.
Definitely.
That's
the young handsome blonde man. Yeah. Joe Pirate Roberts.
I got to meet Carrie Elwes. It was like one of the best moments of my life. Like it was, he was here at a local Comic-Con, and I freaked out as soon as I saw he was going to be there. And I said to my boys, hey, do you want to go meet Wesley from The Princess Bride? And of course, they both automatically screamed and yelled and said yes. And so we dressed up. We all dressed up. I was Buttercup. My oldest was the Dread Pirate Roberts, and my youngest was the grandson, because I happened to have that Chicago Bears jersey, football jersey.
Amazing.
Yeah. So we went and it was like the most amazing experience I've ever had, getting to meet that man. Like I was like, I don't even know what to say to you. I just love you.
I want to be here. Yeah.
And I'm obsessed with your movie, just so you know. But I feel like he would get that, because he wrote that fantastic book, The Making of the Princess Bride, which I listened to on audio, and he reads it, and he loves that movie too. Oh, he does. So they have it where, he's in like a little booth and they have it curtained off. And so, they had the people before us who went in, and then, they closed the curtain, and then a couple minutes later, they're like, okay, you can go in now. So we went in, those people were still in there. He saw us in our costumes, stopped talking to them, turned around and immediately came over to me and my boys and was like, oh my gosh, this is fantastic, and gave me a big hug, and he hugged my boy. And I felt bad because he had totally just left the other people who were in the booth with him. But at the same time, I was like, yes. So, you
put forward the effort. You deserve it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Also, he man, remember hugs? Wow.
I know, right?
This is a historical account.
Yes. Oh my god.
You get hug strangers. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So people like me, we do catch all those references, and we love them and appreciate them.
Right.
Nice.
So I love that.
Honestly, we're still finding them. Like, sometimes people will tag us both, and they'll be pointing to some death metal band with like some lyric from some song, and they'll be like, oh, is this a reference? And Jay will be like, yes, good on you. And I'm like, today I learned. And
there's also a reference in Obsidio that Amie wrote that no one in the world will get but the two of us.
No,
like it's literally just for us. It appears completely innocuous unless you're us, and that was just kind of a little shout out for the end of the series. So
it was like I wrote a private joke just for my friend, for my audience of one. And again, hard to get Jay to cry. It's also hard to get him to just crack up laughing, and to this day he cracks up laughing thinking about it, and that just gives me enormous satisfaction.
Yeah, it's great.
I love that. Well, thank you both so much again for coming on today and chatting with me. This has been a lot of fun, and I'm sure my listeners have really enjoyed this as well. And I appreciate you taking the time out and coming to be on here. So Amie, you just had something, your new one is just come out, right, for your series. Do you want to mention that? Right.
Yeah, so Beyond the End of the World just came out, which is the sequel to The Other Side of the Sky. So that duology is now complete. And that's me done for 2022. That's book number 18 we worked out. A group of people got to watch me try and add live the other day when someone asked me what number book it was, and then they all understood what I meant about not being good at really any kind of maths. But yeah, so that duology is complete now. That's my kind of sci-fi fantasy mashup that I wrote with Megan Spooner. And so I now get a break till 2023. And, I will say, actually, because the people who are listening to this are podcast people, that my 2023 release is a book called The Isles of the Gods, which is my first ever solo YA. It's fantasy. And starting this year in probably late Feb, early March, I'm going to be starting a new podcast with a friend of Jason mine called Kate Armstrong. It's called Pub Dates, and it's going to be an every second week behind the scenes look at the countdown to those books coming out. So we're going to take readers with us through editorial and cover design and getting ready for launch, and kind of do like a making of podcast that will then culminate in the books coming out. So I feel like the sort of people who like to listen to your behind the scenes kind of chats would be into that kind of thing as well. So it's called Pub Dates, and we are recording it now. It's really fun.
Fantastic.
I'm enjoying it.
Well, I'm going to look forward to listening to that. And then Jay, you had, aside from Aurora, you had your Empire of the Vampire book come out. That's going to be a series, right? So you've got another one of those. Is that what you're working on now?
Yeah, that's a trilogy.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm writing book 2 at the moment. The other release that I have one release coming out this year, but it's a special edition of the Nevernight trilogy. So that's coming out through LitJoy Crate. It's going to kind of be a deluxe edition, kind of leather bound and sprayed edges and illustrated. Like it's very, very fancy. So yeah,
too fancy for the likes of you, my friend.
I subscribe to I subscribed to LitJoy Crate, and when I saw that, I was like, whoa, I'm going to set my calendar for this one, like writing this down. I was so excited. It's going to be really good.
Yeah, they're going to be beautiful books. Like those people have pulled out all the stops. They're going to be gorgeous. So I think they go on sale in May or maybe March. But that's my release for this year. And Empire 2 will be coming out next year. So I've just started briefing Bon on the illustrations. And it's going really well. It's really fun to write.
Yeah. I mean, every Empire book is like 2 to 3 regular books. So
yes,
they're very long. They're very long. It will probably be longer than Empire was. And Empire was 240,000 words. So yeah, they take a little bit of doing. But it's fun.
One of my middle school students today, she was in 8th grade. She had a book with her. I said, "Oh, what are you reading?" And it was a vampire book, but she said, "But it's for adults though, but it's okay." I said, "Okay." I said, "Well, I read one recently that's also for adults that was really good, but you can't read it. Not till you're older."
No,
I said, not age appropriate for you. So I'm not going to even tell you what it's called.
No. I mean, I was reading Stephen King at 10, which is probably too young. I turned out okay, but I mean, yeah.
But like Leah's a teacher. She can't be the teacher being like, "Oh, here you go." The kids have to find it on their own, like we did.
Right. Like I can say,
very, very true.
I can say very vaguely, there is another one by a really good Australian author, but I can't really specifically recommend it to you.
No.
And then it's up to her.
I did it at the middle school library.
Yeah. Oh gosh, I'd be fired if that.
Right. Don't do that. Don't take that hit. She'll find it on her own.
Yes, shoot. I have no doubt in my mind that this particular student will indeed do that too. Well, thank you again. So everybody listening now, you can look forward to these new books that Amie and Jay have got coming out and Amie's podcast. Thank you again so much for both of you being here. And thank you to everybody for listening, and we will chat again soon. Today's episode featured the books Aurora Rising, Aurora Burning, and Aurora's End in the Aurora Cycle by Amie Kaufman and Jay Kristoff. A special thank you to both Amie and Jay for joining me today on YA Book Chat, and thank you to Josh Redlic, Publicity Manager at Random House Children's Book, for setting up the interview. Be sure to follow YA Book Chat on Instagram, and don't forget to subscribe so you get your episodes as soon as they are available. YA Book Chat was created by, is hosted, and edited by me, Leah Stuhler.